This is like one of the deepest dreams I've ever had. It's almost embarrassing to talk about, knowing that other people will hear this, but it's like important. I'm a very hardcore skeptical person. I hear people talk about things that are so wild and crazy. I'm just like, how can the universe hold such like bizarre shit that makes no sense? And then that bizarre shit happens to you. It's like when it happens to you, it's like it's different. It's so hard to deny because the synchronicities are just so complex that it's not something that you could just fucking make up or that you would even want to make up. It's so traumatic or like deep. I strongly believe that there are different kinds of dreams, and some are personal and some are transpersonal and some are like cosmic in scale, and that we really do go places and we really do tap into spiritual realms and memories that are meant to help ripen our experience as we move through life.
The Dream World podcast is about creating community and conversation. It's about the bigger picture of science, art, technology, and consciousness. My guest on this episode is Sara Finn. She's a multimedia artist with some incredible experiences and energy to share with you. She's really talented, and of course, she's a lucid dreamer, so I automatically think she's cool. If you like this episode or my podcast in general, or you feel like supporting a stranger, please leave a review, like, share, support, whatever you gotta do to both of our content. You can find me at thedreamworldpodcast.com, and you can find Sara at sarafinn.com. Also, everything is linked below. Love y'all, let's get to it.
Oh my gosh, I feel like it's always hard to start somewhere, but I'm just going to be a dork and I'm going to start from the beginning. I feel like it just started as a really small child with very wild dreams, and dreams have always been one of the like foundation keys of my life and my consciousness and like how I experience the story of like whatever this incarnation is, you know? And I grew up in California. I was born in the mid-'80s, and I was very blessed with like lots of great media, you know, it's fantasy oriented and stuff. During that era, we had classics like The Neverending Story and, you know, things like that. But I noticed pretty early on that like I was having really wild dreams that kind of went above and beyond any kind of potential outside influence. You know, I was having experiences that were beyond the scope of what a kid my age had maybe seen or heard anywhere. And so I knew it wasn't necessarily like things I saw on TV or stories that I heard in books or things like that. And they were very impactful on like a spiritual level. I paid as close attention to my dream life as I did my waking life from the get-go. And I feel like that had a really big influence on my personality as a visionary or mystical kind of person. That's always been my primary orientation. And it was what drove me to be an artist. I wanted to like interpret my experience through art as like the lens of like, how do I digest these really big experiences? When I wake up in the morning, I'm just this little girl. Like I've just gone on this crazy journey and adventure. Like, how do I come back to this world? I was a kid with my head in the clouds, as they'd say. I became a psychonaut later on in my late teens. And so that was kind of a way for me to bridge the visionary states in this waking life with my dream experiences. And I started writing about my dreams really early. Like the very first little book I wrote as a kid was about a dream that I had. I called it My Green Gumball. It was like I had a dream about like a magical green gumball that popped out of the machine and became anthropomorphized, and he was my buddy. So like I've always been motivated to be a storyteller and like relate my experiences to other people. And I often had friends and family be like, wow, those dreams are so vivid. How do you remember them so well? Or they sound like a movie, or like you just went somewhere else. And a lot of my dreams would be sort of outside the scope of like everyday life. Like I don't typically have dreams about people in my waking life, or even it's hard to think of a specific word that might apply. But oftentimes I would have dreams where I was a different person. And I always found that really interesting. So I've always been interested in like hearing about other people's experiences with dreams and how they shape them. And similarly with visionary states, like I'm a connoisseur of hearing people's trip reports. So I feel like there's this really amazing fabric of like a collective shared consciousness that we tap into both when we dream and when we wake. yeah, so going from like a traditional artist in the first like more formative few decades of my life, like in the past, I'd say close to 8 years or so, I've been working with digital art and in particular VR, because it's a way to create an immersive experience where you can like bring somebody into an environment or a place and sort of share what would have been like a subjective experience with people in a way where they can like embody it in a more like one-to-one direct way. So I'm just like a crazy, wild, psychedelic, dreaming, visionary artist. I call myself the artist and a philosopher. That's probably the best way to wrap it up.
Were your parents like, how did they react to your dreams as a kid? Were they like supportive and involved, or were they the kind of parents that were just like, oh, just a dream or whatever?
For the most part, my parents were kind of hands off, like in a weird way. Like, don't have the best relationship with my mom. She was not very curious or involved or engaged in any of that like stuff. She was the one that would dub me like, "You have your head in the clouds, like come back to earth."
Gotcha.
Pops was pretty hands off, but he was like always like supportive and loving. He never would discount any of my curiosity about it. He was always very supportive of like me as an artist and me as a thinker. And he was like very stoic though, very quiet. So I know that he had a couple very impactful mystical experiences in his life, but he didn't talk very much about them because I think they spooked him out. But I think that if there is any kind of like familial component to that aptitude, it probably comes from him and his side of the family. Because there's some of the women on his side of the family that also have kind of like that, I don't know, that little mystical flair that pops in and out. But he was always very supportive of me as an artist. And I think he appreciated that my art came from a cognitive curiosity about consciousness. Like how do dreams work? How does consciousness work? Like, kind of like thinking about thinking in a way. And so he was always really supportive of that.
Cool. Tell me a little bit about your art. Like, how do you use your dreams for inspiration, and how do you turn that into something tangible? Is this like an intentional process, or you just kind of like see cool things in your dreams and try to replicate them or honor them in some way?
It's so funny because I question myself a lot, like, what is my style? And I don't feel like, a lot of my friends and family, when they see my work, they're probably the most intimate with it, right? They see me in my process and they see the finished result. They can tell when a piece is mine just because they've seen the evolution of my work. But each of my pieces of art feel so unique to me because a lot of the things I'm most driven to create and finish a piece are driven by a direct experience I've had. And I think that in a way, I like to think of it more as a form of cartography, right? There's an awesome visionary artist. His name is Luke Brown. And he once said that he thinks of himself as like a hyperdimensional cartographer. And so in a way, it's like, I'm an artist, but I also think that for me, the art form in and of itself is being the experiencer and just like taking in as much data as you can from a place where you're not projecting onto it. Like you're not trying to interpret it. You're trying to just like be open as a channel and let it be as raw and complete in all of its data. So I try to just be an open channel. And I think about it having I like to think it's like a collaboration with the universe, or the universe is using me as its paintbrush rather than me like trying to control what comes out. Just like whatever has the strongest signal and is most compelling, or there's the most data, or it's like a deep experience that I'm like, wow, that was really impactful. That's what I need to communicate. So it can be dream motifs, or it can be sort of like, I have a lot of storylines and things that I've been working with over the years that are directly inspired by dreams. I do think of myself as a writer, although it's not a big part of the work that I've put out into the world yet. But it's definitely a part of a lot of the stuff that I'm developing as a VR and digital artist. I think it's been easiest to flow with VR as a medium in the past 8 years because of that, because I can bring someone into my experience. So yeah, it could be anything from like, I'm trying to think of specific pieces. So some pieces might be inspired by hypnagogic experiences I've had. I had some kind of like weird hyperdimensional angelic contact one time a number of years ago in 2019 that scared the piss out of me, but it was also super beautiful. And I was like, holy shit. And I immediately the next morning jumped into VR and painted it. And even though it's not necessarily one of the most like spectacular executions of art. It's very subtle. It's very abstract, but it's so like faithfully executed as a one-to-one representation to what I experienced that I think it's a really successful piece. And so in that way, I think that pieces like that, I'm like, that's the moment where I'm kind of like a researcher, and that is an artifact or like a catalog moment of an experience. And so I think of art as both like an artful experience where you look at it to appreciate beauty, but it's also, kind of like a field guide when you go out into like a jungle or some ecosystem that you're unfamiliar with and you're charting and you want to make good documentation of the territory.
That's really cool. Your explanation made me smile because it's really fascinating how you said that kind of like the universe just uses you as the vessel. And I've heard that with a lot of like really talented musicians even and artists. And they're like, yeah, I didn't really make this. It just kind of came through me from somewhere else, representing what's out there. And I think that's a really interesting concept. Like that just blows my mind.
Yeah, that's definitely my favorite dynamic and relationship with the artistic experience. That's the stuff that is most fulfilling on a spiritual level for me.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the VR that you do because, virtual reality is so interesting to me as well because I don't know much about it. So you'll have to tell me, but it kind of feels like a lucid dream. Like I'm in like this other world that is not my world, but I'm consciously experiencing it and creating things.
I mean, it's a new technology. It's not like it's been around for very long. So it makes sense that not many people have exposure with it. And there's still a little bit of accessibility isn't quite there yet. It's not like an everyday thing the way cell phones are. But I became interested in it back in, initially, I would say 2014, but I really got involved in about 2018. Initially, I was really intrigued because I don't like the idea of making digital art with a screen and a mouse. There's like a dimensional disconnect. I don't like not feeling in touch with the art directly. And that just seems like an abstract, dissociation. And I was really excited about the potential of VR just from like an immersive perspective, not even so much gaming as more like theater, because I studied a lot of performance art with my degree from University of California, Santa Cruz. That was sort of my thesis, was projection performance art. So I was obsessed with translating the DMT experience for people and just like being a DMT elf ambassador. I just had this like really goofy idea that, I could be an emissary for them and just like communicate this mystical experience with projected abstract videos and like dressing up in fractal, kind of hyperdimensional mythical beings and dancing around, just being a goober. I wanted to make animations natively in a digital medium that would just be easier. And I realized in 2018, there's an awesome program called Tilt Brush that was purchased by Google from these two developers, Hackett and Skillman. I tried a demo in I think like 2014 or 2015. And I knew that was the moment I was like, okay, like I can be a traditional artist and then work directly in VR in a way with the controllers where like I'm drawing in a 3D space or I'm sculpting in a 3D space. And I have all these beautiful brushes that create different colors and shapes and like animated effects. So that was really the moment when I was like, okay, the medium has developed to a point where I can interface with it in a way that's going to enable me to make visuals to project, but then I can, create like an immersive space in this world, not the virtual world. I could just project it right on a screen or something, and then bring other people into that like pseudo little world building moment. Kind of like analog AR, which is augmented reality for people who don't know that acronym yet. VR is virtual reality. AR is augmented reality. So kind of like Pokemon Go, or there's a Niantic game called Egress, I think it's called. So you hold up your phone and there's like an overlay over the real world with like digital environments, which is kind of cool. So that was how I got into it. But I found it really interesting in 2018 when I really dove in deep that there was a connection between not only lucid dreaming and virtual reality and psychedelics. And so that intersection between those three things has been like my ground zero ever since. For those who don't know, Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna both had very like avid curiosities about the future, in particular with virtual reality. It came after their time, but in their later years, right before they both passed, they were very much interested in that. And Tim Leary in particular dubbed the word cyberdelic. And that was his jam in a bunch of different college lectures a year or two before he passed. So it's 2018 and I've just built my big machine that can let me play in VR easily. Side note, I scrubbed toilets for a year at like Airbnbs on the Big Island in Hawaii while I lived there in like a roach motel to be able to afford a computer that could chug hard enough to do virtual reality on the regular. I was like, kind of a scrappy artist type, and getting a hold of a machine that powerful was no easy task. And so like I went without any luxuries for a long time. I mean, granted, I lived in Hawaii. Like we had beautiful sunsets. Those are priceless. But no shaved ice for me, no boba tea for me for like a year. I'm just scrubbing toilets, working hard, chop wood, carry water so I could build this machine. So I have my machine and I'm spending a lot of time in Tilt Brush. And I noticed something happening with my dream life. I always struggled with lucidity when I was a child. I would feel like I would become aware of the dream environment, but it would also, I would be aware of the edges of it environment in the sense that you're like in a video game and there's only so much of the game that's built out and you get to the edge of the level and you're like, and my dream would evaporate. And that was a lot of my lucidity limitations as a kid. When I started working in VR, in Tilt Brush, you can choose the environment which you paint in. And I would often choose just a black backdrop because I have this neurological quirk. It's called aphantasia. So I don't have a visual representation of my imagination in my mind's eye. Like when I close my eyes, it's just black. Like if I try to imagine an apple, I mean, I have the idea of an apple and I know what an apple looks like. And I can like turn an imaginary apple in my mind's eye, but there's no signal. So it's like having a computer that knows where all the files are, but there's no monitor to show you the apple. And it's kind of weird because a lot of people don't realize that they have aphantasia just because they think everybody's mind works that way. But I didn't figure it out till, I don't know, I was about 30 or so. I'm 37 now. So to make my artistic environment similar to my native like mind frame when I go to make art, I just choose a black backdrop and Tilt Brush. And so I'll start painting, creating a space and just pulling these ideas from this aphantasia like blank slate into a virtual reality. And I remember having a dream in 2018 that was like the most intense lucid dream I ever had. And it was the thing that just opened up a floodgate to like a whole new chapter and revelation in both like my mystical experiences, my psychedelic experiences, my dream experiences. I had a dream that was a composite of 5 different dreams that were reoccurring that I had had throughout my life. And it was almost like 5 different movie sets all smushed together into one like meta place. One of them was a birthday party when I was very small, maybe like 8 years old. One of them was Burning Man. One of them was like an immersive cabaret theater show, kind of like the ones that I used to do in San Francisco in the underground art scene. And I think one was like, I don't know, just my regular house, my childhood home. And there was like some other one that I don't really recall, but there was like a big party happening that sort of encompassed all these different places. And I'm there and there's familiar characters, like there's my brother and there's some friends of mine, there's some Burning Man people I know. In the middle of the space, there's this abstract board game on the ground. And there's a man probably in his like mid 20s, maybe late 20s. And he looks like maybe he's French or French Israeli or something. He has like curly, longer hair. He looks kind of Mediterranean, but he's very handsome. And I kind of like don't want to pay attention to him because he's intimidating, but he's doing something that's extremely compelling. And I was fascinated with what he was doing. He had this long metal pole with a contraption at the end of it that looked like a metal detector. And he was sort of waving it across this board game surface in the middle of this meta environment. And the board game was morphing underneath the device. So he was like creating this reality and bending things to his will in this like little, I don't know, I guess you could call it like a mini simulation. It's a board game that represents a reality of some kind. I'm watching what he's doing. And I'm like, wow, I want to know what it is he's doing. So I'm watching him and I walk up to him and I kind of like strike up a conversation. Like, would you mind explaining to me what's happening here? And he looks up at me and he starts telling me a story. And he tells me the story of a dream I had 2 weeks earlier, a dream that I had been smuggling some very important hyperdimensional information during some kind of like galactic or cosmic war across a wall, across like a wall that was so high it went between worlds. I'm going to apologize in advance if I get like choked up because this is very deep for me. And at the top of the wall, I was like floating up with this like important information to pass along. And I came across an angel, and her name was Samantha. She was beautiful, and she was like 9 feet tall. She had like golden hair, and she was very grateful and very sweet and sincere. And she thanked me for my efforts. And she took the message and she went beyond in a realm where I couldn't go. And I was like, cool. I did whatever duty they wanted of me, and it was very touching. It was very moving. And when this man told me my dream, I relived it. And it was so private and personal. It's like, how could you possibly know that? And I looked at him, and this is like one of the deepest dreams I've ever had. It's almost embarrassing to talk about, knowing that other people will hear this, but it's like important, at least to me. And I realized that this avatar, I'll call it that, was an avatar of like the Godhead. And it was like big spirit finding a way to talk to me in a way that like I could be present with. And I don't like using the God word just because it's so loaded from so many different cultural interpretations. But that was like big spirit talking to me. And it basically said like, I want to show you how to shape reality. And I was blown away. And I just like was like, okay, like I'm here, I'm listening, like whatever you want me to hear or need me to hear, like I'm listening. And then he or it, whatever, created this little environment that was like Tilt Brush. It was just this dark, calm little place, and a glowing orb appeared, and it was like golden metal that was liquid and morphing in space. And like this avatar gently guided me to manipulate the shape of the orb, and squish it this way and squish it that way and stretch it and move it. And as I was having that experience, like I just started crying uncontrollably. Like it was so beautiful. It moving. I was just like, my cup overflowed. I was like, holy shit, this is beautiful. And I just started sobbing, and I woke up with happy tears, and my life was just different from then on out. My lucidity in general just took off in a way that like I did not have much understanding of how to account for. And then at some point shortly after that, I came across research that had been showing that people who had been regularly using virtual reality had a significant increase in their ability to have lucid dreams. I also found some Reddit reports of this. My little YouTube channel, Dream Seed VR, I think it was like around September or so last year, I did an episode on lucid dreaming in VR where I cite those studies. So if people want to go check out that video and go check out that research and see, like the specifics of it, I definitely encourage that. I'm not talking out my ass. It's very real. And so I was interested in like how I could help other people become lucid more often, but then also potentially use VR as a tool to make that leap a little bit more effortless. Because there's this phenomenon where you're in VR, you're aware that you're in a simulation. And so you do that sort of brain check thing that you do sometimes in a dream where like the circumstances are very surreal or just don't quite line up with reality. And you look around and you're like, wait a minute, is this a dream? And you do that reality check. On some level, your brain is kind of doing that all the time in VR because you know that it's a simulation. So it kind of trains your brain in a subconscious way to do that reality check more often without thinking about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. Thank you for sharing that dream, by the way. Let me just start with that. That was really incredible, really inspiring. And yeah, it definitely gave me goosebumps. The VR thing is cool because I've read, I'll link your YouTube and everything, of course, but I have read a lot of studies too. In terms of video games, even just regular video games, it really is that kind of like same thought process of making like conscious decisions in another little world. So VR is kind of like the full simulation version of that. I could totally see how it would like increase lucidity just in general. And another thing you said too that I relate to was how you kind of had a dream where you could like feel the edges of it, kind of like where the dream kind of stops rendering or whatever. That happens to me a lot. And it's really fascinating because it's like sometimes I can like border like the waking world and the dream world. And I can like feel the edge and I can like halfway see my room, halfway see the dream. And it just like blends into this gradient. It's really hard to explain, but it's always fascinated me how we can kind of surf that border and like see the edges of the dream. That's super cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's similar consciousness almost constructing reality, and then when you get to the edge of that, in the waking life, how there are similarities, like in a way that the waking life is a different kind of dream and that they're just different consciousness states. And that was why I became really interested in Tibetan dream yoga, is because a lot of people will think, oh, is it a kind of lucidity training, or is it just, lucidity plus, right? I'm a relatively new student of it, and I've had an interest in Buddhism for a long time. And by no means am I an expert or deeply, deeply versed in it. But in the past few years, as I've started incorporating my learning in that modality into my own personal practice more, I noticed that a lot of the natural techniques that I developed over the years were very similar to things that are described in Tibetan dream yoga. And the thing that I find most interesting about it is this idea that it's a way of like training yourself to be conscious and aware and like lucid in realities of all kinds. So it's not just a kind of lucidity that you have when you're asleep, but it's a lucidity that you bring to your waking life too. You sort of like treat your waking life as an opportunity to be lucid and to sort of like shape your reality in that same way that you might shape a lucid dream.
So you said something too earlier about how you have dreams of different perspectives and being different people, living different lives and things like that. And, I was talking to one of my friends too, who said she had this dream of an entire lifetime when she was like 4, like an entire lifetime. She died in the dream and woke up the next day in her life. So what do you think about like different dimensions, alternate realities, like when it comes to, dreams, psychedelics, all the connecting factors of like how we can enter these other worlds? Like obviously science cannot explain that, but like what's been your thoughts on that?
There's a cool metaphor that I came across the other week. I don't even know if it relates in the context of its original mentioning. So I think it was Liv Barry. She's like a cool, nerdy, sciencey poker player chick from the UK. She was talking to a podcast guest and they started talking about something called the Mind Cathedral. And I don't know specifically in the context of their talk, like who originated that idea or what of it. Unfortunately, there was no context in the clip, but they did mention something about how it's kind of like a memory palace. It's kind of like this thing that you build in your mind, and the beauty of having to come to grips with, you're never going to see the cathedral completely built in a lifetime. And I feel like that's very much the greater painting of my personal experience in all these different dimensions and how they weave together. Like I'm never going to see the end of the cathedral built in this lifetime. And depending on people's, spiritual backgrounds or whatever, they may or not believe in reincarnation or multiple lives or things like that. I've had a lot of personal experiences in dreams and other states that lead me to think that souls do ripen over a number of incarnations. And I've had memories of being other people in dreams that sometimes are in different timelines that are just completely wild and crazy, and I can't match them to anything historically in this timeline. And I've had others that do match up with historical events in this timeline that were very profound and changed me as a person when I woke up. I've also had lots of psychedelic experiences that weave in and out of those other experiences. So I don't really see them as like separate categories of experience. I'm being so like raw and open that it's like kind of scary, but I think it's important. And I don't have any shame, but I know that I don't want to offend anybody. So I talk about these things with a lot of reverence. I had an experience where like for years I was doing my performance art and fire spinning and LED spinning and like creating these like theatrical, immersive ritual experiences, trying to like communicate sacredness to people as humbly as I could. So I was a very shy kid. And, I was in my early 20s doing this stuff and going to school. And I found myself dressing up in a lot of horizontal black and white stripes. And after my first few DMT experiences, I found myself very interested in clowns. And I didn't understand like where this weird fascination with black and white clowns came from, or horizontal stripes. And then at one point I had a dream that really rocked my world in one of the most like heartbreaking and graphic ways I've ever experienced. And like trigger warning is bad, sad shit about to be relayed. I dreamt of being about 17 and being a young man, kind of an androgynous young man, spiritually like very neutral, not super masculine, not super feminine either, just very androgynous. And I'm a fairly androgynous person in my life. I just don't ascribe to any of that crap. I don't really care. I just want to be me. So I felt continuity in that way. But I was a young man and I was 17 and I lived in a community out. I'm just going to like talk about it in like raw data points, and then I'll like collapse it with the other kinds of context that give it, a more accurate picture of what's going on. I lived in a community with my family and it was kind of outdoors, right? I knew that both of my parents had passed away and I lived with my grandmother and my uncle. And my uncle did a lot of leather work and he hunted for our community. And my grandmother, she would take me for a walk every morning and she would teach me about different plants and stuff. And she had done that with me since I was a little kid. I first lost my parents. And we lived what seemed like outside. And as a, modern Westerner, that's very different than the experience I had growing up, obviously. I remember like at one point, these strange looking pale people came on horseback to visit us. And we had this really awkward exchange. And I think I offended them. And I was kind of embarrassed. I tried to crack a joke to like, ease the tension, but I made it worse somehow. And so I was a little worried about it, but I kind of blew it off. Then like a day or so later, these people came back and there were a lot more of them. And this is where it gets really bad. I'm so sorry. They killed my community and somebody recognized me and they knew I was the kid that had offended them. And so they killed my uncle and they killed my grandma and they killed everybody in my community. And they saved me for last. It felt like with every person that died, like all of our stories died, all of the information about our families and like all the myths died. And like, it was like cups of like sacred fucking liquid being shattered and spilled everywhere. And they saved me for last as like punishment for mocking them. And they cut my throat. I remember bleeding out. And I remember the coldness of the air on my throat from all the blood. And I could see this like slow, sticky, dark red puddle growing by my face. I could feel the blood on my cheek. And I died. And I woke up and I so desperately wanted to scream and nothing came out of my throat. It was this hoarse, empty scream, no sound. And I sobbed and sobbed and I did not recognize where I was. I was at my friend's house. I didn't know where I was. And like this weird abstract building came into view. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in a fucking old Victorian and I'm in Santa Cruz and it's 2011 and I'm Sara and I'm 20 whatever years old and I'm not that kid. And I remember all these other details coming in about his life. He was training to be a contrary. He was a koshari. He was a tribal clown in training in the Lakota community. And I realized why I had been obsessed with wearing black and white stripes and clowns for the past 3 or 4 years. I realized that like I was trying to connect with these memories of being someone else in another time. And years later, gosh, maybe like 3 years later, I found myself extremely sad one day and I was kind of crying and I could not stop thinking about that grandma. I couldn't stop thinking about that family and how connected I felt. And I wanted to understand. And I thought about it and I was like, well, those were plains. Those were like, I thought about the hills and the plains and the rocks and the trees. And I was like, what tribe could that have been? Because I didn't know. And I was like, because there's a couple different tribes that have Heyoka, Koshari, contraries, which are tribal clowns. And I remember looking up, I was like, wait a minute, like Wounded Knee was a massacre that happened to one of those tribes. And so I looked it up and that day was the anniversary of Wounded Knee. And I was just like, what are the odds of that? What are the odds of it being that day? It's like 1 in 365 days. And why would I look it up that day? And why would I feel those feelings that day? And I felt this presence come into my consciousness. And it was the grandmother from that life. And I was crying and I was like, I miss you. Like, why did I die? Why did you die? Like, how can I keep doing the work that I was meant to do for my community in that life that got cut short? how do I finish that karma? And I just felt so like cut off from what I was supposed to do for the people I love. And she said, you're doing it. You're doing it in this life. You died because you're needed here more. And you're strong enough to go through the pain. And you bring that same mission with you in any time that you're born. Is so surreal. And just like, I'm a very hardcore skeptical person. I hear people talk about things that are so wild and crazy. I'm just like, how can the universe hold such like bizarre shit that makes no sense? And then that bizarre shit happens to you. It's like when it happens to you, it's like it's different. It's so hard to deny because the synchronicities are just so complex that it's not something that you could just fucking make up or that you would even want to make up. It's so traumatic or like deep, you know, it's like barely capable of holding the depth of how wild those experiences have been. And so like that's just one life. And then I had another life as like a young woman, maybe like 19 or so in the 14th century in Europe, probably like, I don't know, she was blonde. I don't know what region of Europe she was from. I don't think it was France, but it was like Central Europe. And she had a little boy who was about 3 and he died of cancer. And it was like a weird ass cancer that people should not be getting in Europe when there's no plastics and carcinogens and stuff on that level. And I was devastated. I felt like my genes gave it to him. I felt like I had doomed him to that fate. And he was so calm and he knew he was going to die and he was sick, but he was so just like at peace. And he comforted me. Like I'm the grown up and he's looking up at me and he goes, "It's okay, mommy. I'm going to go home." And he was like, "I'm just going to go home, but I'll see you later and it's going to be okay. And you're going to be okay." And he died and I was devastated. And then the house I was in pulled apart at the seams, at the edges of the corners of the house, tiny little shack house. And these beings came in through the cracks and they were like tall and thin and white and made of light. Like, I don't know, they didn't have hair or anything. They were bipedal and they had big heads, but they were made of white light. They had long, thin limbs. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? Who are you? What the fuck is happening? Where's my child? This is weird. And they were like, "It's okay. None of that was real." And I go like, "What the fuck are you talking about? This is my life. That was my baby. You can't tell me this isn't real. That was fucking real." And pardon my cursing, I'm a crass person. And they say, "The only thing that was real was your love. Like love is the ultimate reality. Everything else was just window dressings to learn through these different lifetimes." And those are the 2 most prominent experiences that changed me as a person, that I distinctly feel like in terms of like past lives or other reincarnations or whatever, like they were totally transcendent dreams. I strongly believe that there are different kinds of dreams, and some are personal and some are transpersonal and some are like cosmic in scale, and that we really do go places and we really do tap into spiritual realms and memories that are meant to help ripen our experience as we move through life. And I feel the same way about different trips too. You know, like I've been a psychonaut for 20 years as of this year. And I've had experiences that are far beyond my ability to imagine, you know, like there's no way that shit came from my imagination. Like that comes from like an outer realm of richness that is beyond just my capacity to fabricate with my consciousness. And I think that it's just like a big never ending tapestry. It's that cathedral that'll never finish being built, but I'm just here to like open-endedly add brick by brick with just being an open vessel to the experiences.
You're honoring those stories by telling them, you know, and I know it's hard and, you know, no need to feel weird or anything because I love talking about these things. And I completely agree with you, you know, about how some dreams are just bigger than us, you know? So many people have past life experiences that it's just so hard to deny at this point. There is even a lot of physical evidence behind them.
Yeah.
Like you finding out, you know, exactly on the day, like, you know, the tribe and the wounded knee stuff, and being able to find out specific details. Like, that's just really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I just want to honor it because I know it's such a sensitive topic. And I know that we live in a really multicultural world. And I have utmost reverence for tribal cultures, and in particular, the shamanic work that Heyokas and Koshari that they do. And I know that there's still a lot of healing to be done. And, you know, I don't necessarily think that, you know, one can ever completely heal, but I think that part of it is like, I've heard a phrase that the wound is like the gateway, you know, like transmuting pain and trauma is the path that lets us grow into a bigger vessel than we were before. It's kind of like that Japanese pottery technique where they fill the crack with gold to fix it.
I know it's so hard to explain, but when it comes to all these timelines, but when you get a glimpse of the past or the future or whatever, what are your thoughts on how that works? Like, how are we able to see other times?
I definitely think that time is nonlinear. I definitely think that it has a quantum entanglement quality to it where it sort of like fractals out into sort of like different reality tunnels based on our choices and the way we are entangled with matter on a conscious level, and then the way that we're entangled with other people. And I think that those same relationships are similar to the structures of how karma works. I've had experiences where like I've been tripping balls on Pharmawaska and I have like a vision of a specific place and time that I've never been. And then years later, I've found myself there. And there was an incident where like I had told a former partner about that vision. And then fast forward a year and a half later, we're at the place that I mentioned in the vision. And I turn to them while we're there and I say, remember the time I told you about? And like I had cited a very specific song that was playing in the vision. It was like a rat-a-tat song. And I had described the environment of the vision. It was like a community center, and it was like a party, and there was hardwood floor, and it was kind of like an event. I used to do a lot of event production stuff for different like music events and things. And I was up in Humboldt, and we were like, I was fire performing at a party, and I brought him with me. And as soon as I said, hey, remember the time I told you about that vision with the rat-a-tat song? And he just went white as a ghost because he knew exactly what I was talking about. And he looked around, and he was like, holy fuck, this is the thing that you talked about a year and a half ago. So it's like, deja vu is weird, especially when it happens like in almost, it felt like reverse, you know, where like you foresee something. It's not like you know it in the moment. It's like deja vu is like when it happens back to back, like click, click, you've been here before, you've done this before. But this was like a year and a half between the gap. Or that same Pharmawaska vision, like I saw myself at Burning Man on Monday night, tripping balls on K. And like, pardon my language, people, that's just my experience. And then, you know, a year and a half, 2 years later, there I am at Burning Man, just doing my art thing with my friends, and it's Monday evening. And I look around and I'm like, wow, this is that place and time that I already got a glimpse of. So I definitely think that based on my personal experience with those like data sets, that time functions in a way that we only see in one format when our consciousness is suspended in this waking life. I think that it's simultaneously unfolding in a multidimensional fashion that's interconnected in a nonlinear way. So like we see it in a straight line, but it's like probably on just like a crazy fractal sphere of some kind, you know? Like the multiverse is probably a three-dimensional fractal moving through a hyperdimensional space. And we're just one little squiggle, but there's like parallel ones. Like, cause I've had dreams where, you know, and these are dreams, like you were saying, your friend, her having dreams of whole lifetimes when she was 4. I had dreams when I was very small, like 6, 7, 8, where, and this is way before I got into sci-fi, I had dreams of being a grown-ass woman in another timeline in a deep future cyberpunk setting. And I was a courier spy transporting data and artifacts and espionage shit. And I was like straight, like Ghost in the Shell style running missions. This was long before I ever saw anything remotely like Ghost in the Shell. I wasn't watching cyberpunk films at 6 years old, but I was dreaming about other worlds in distant technological futures, like involved in geopolitical tradecraft, which is the word for spy shit. So yeah, it's like I have no way to like account for any of these things. I just know that like I've had very detailed experiences that lead me to believe that things work in a way outside of like our current models account for.
That's incredible. And that's why I do this podcast, because there's so much to talk about, so many experiences that are so valid and just open up the world to what we don't know. And yeah, when it comes to the structure of just the universe and these timelines and other lives and realities, it's bigger than our brain is built to understand. And that's why we have things like dreams and visions, psychedelics, meditations, whatever, to give us these little glimpses of what's out there, to kind of remind us, and that can be hard to deal with too. Like you said, like when you remember all that past baggage from your past lives, like that shit's really hard to bear. There's a reason that we forget about it, and we're reminded in little glimpses, because that's a lot to carry for sure.
Yeah, I think that on some level, the universe, a little bit at a time, gives us what we're capable of holding. And even if we have to stretch for it sometimes, like it might take time sometimes, or we might need like camaraderie or support, to be able to hold it or look at it, that we only get dished out what we can hold. And I think that's what makes it really beautiful, being able to, have the opportunities, be brave and share that with people. Because like so many dreams can just sit in my mind and impact me. But like when we're able to hold space for each other and just like share, that's when we get a glimpse of how big the universe is for all of us and all of our personal experiences.
Yeah, for sure. Dream share is so important. I'll share dreams all the time online, and sometimes people will comment like, wow, I really needed this, or I really needed to hear this. And I didn't even think that it was that deep to me, but to somebody else, they might really relate or benefit from it or be inspired by it, and, just normalize talking about dreams so that these experiences can come out more. Yeah,
absolutely.
You said something in the beginning that I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that you have aphantasia, so you can't easily visualize things in your mind. Is that so? You seem to have such vivid dream life, though. So do you see visual imagery in your dreams, and what is that experience like for you? I'm sure it's a spectrum as well.
Oh yeah. Everything that I lack in my waking life, with aphantasia, it doesn't exist in my dream life. Like I have such high clarity in my dream life that it's kind of terrifying. It's like I've had many episodes of almost like existential crisis after I wake up, because the dream is so vivid and hyper real that it totally outstrips anything I experience in reality. I've got pretty good vision. I've got normal ass vision, maybe like a little bit of aphantasia. Like there is a spectrum. So I have aphantasia. As far as glasses go, I meant to say I have a little bit of astigmatism. Another word that starts with an A. Yeah, so aphantasia is typically a scale. There's illustrations people can find on Google. It's like 1 to 5. Like 0 to 1 is no apple, and then 2 to 3 is like a very vague apple. 4 is like there's definitely an apple. 5 is like a very hyper representation of an apple. I'm like a 0 to 1. Normally, like on a really good day, I might get to 2. A really good day. Like I am excited if I can vaguely see anything. It doesn't affect my ability to draw or like imagine what I want to draw. I just don't actually see it till it's on paper. It's hard to describe, but it's like I've sidewired the processor to give me kind of like a spatial representation of it. So it's kind of like almost like a ghosty hologram that's barely there.
Yeah.
But as far as the dreams, like I would make jokes to my friends and family when I would relay my particularly vivid dreams, that because I work in a lot of digital art now, we talk about things in terms of resolution. And so I joke about it being like, instead of 4K, it's like 8K or like 16K. It's just burning out the graphics card. It's so blisteringly hyperdimensional. It's definitely left me with sometimes weeks or months or years of just being perplexed how it's even possible. Wow. It's definitely a gift, but it's like something you have to grapple with. But it's beautiful. I'm very, very lucky. I'm super lucky. And the recall is also a thing. I think recall is like a muscle and it's very trained. I've known people who have aphantasia who don't dream in visuals at all. So I don't think that they're necessarily interconnected. But I think that it's on an individual basis, like what the relationship is between people's aphantasia neurologically and their ability to see things when they dream. Because some folks, as you know, they don't dream visually. Sometimes they might dream in feelings or understandings of narratives, but they don't actually see anything.
Yeah.
Or sometimes people won't be able to dream in color. And sometimes people will be able to smell things in dreams or hear things in dreams. But my dreams are pretty visual, slightly auditory, not as vivid auditorially as other folks sometimes. I fall asleep to audio a lot because I have ADD, and so it's hard for me to fall asleep oftentimes. So a little bit of background noise really helps, especially like cool lectures, like very soothing. And sometimes I'll have the audio from my real world sort of integrated into the dreams in different ways, which is always kind of funny. And sometimes if it's music, it'll become soundtrack-like. But yeah, I feel like in particular, after the lucid dreaming became more vivid with the dream in 2018 with that sort of divine avatar character, that the resolution of my dreams started escalating in tandem with the lucidity. And I ended up with this sort of dream track narrative that evolved over the course. I mean, it's continuing to evolve over the course of many years, where I was invited to join a lucid dreaming academy. When I say lucid dreaming, I mean like it's a hyperdimensional academy where these like beings create dreams. They actually like craft dreams and like broadcast dreams to people. And for that particular enrollment period, it was like a magical school. Think about it like Harry Potter, but for like hyperdimensional beings who make dreams. And I was one of the only, I guess I was the only human during that enrollment period that was invited, because everybody else, I have lots of dreams with hyperdimensional beings that like aren't human and like spiritual beings. And I remember being kind of confused and looking around and being like, wait a minute, I'm the only monkey girl. I'm the only human here. The professor was given an awesome speech. It was almost like Pixar of dreams. And it was fantastic. It was like some Ready Player One kind of thing where I'm looking at these giant walls in this auditorium that are like LED display screens, but they have a first person perspective of this crazy like fantasy cosmic battle going on. And it was almost like a video game. And I'm watching it and I realize it's a dream. I realize it's somebody's perspective, subjective POV of a dream. And it was almost like a demo reel of one of the dreams the academy and the students had created and broadcast to someone. And after the talk, the professor, was talking to students and stuff. And I ran up to him and I was like, I have to get in this academy. Please let me in. He touched my head with his finger and he goes, you have aphantasia. And it was kind of him saying like, this might be a problem. Like, I don't know if I can let you in because you have aphantasia. I was like, oh, that doesn't matter. Trust me. And he goes, oh, and he's like, all right, well, I'll let you in if you can do what I do. I was like, sure. And he transformed into one of those, they're like a medium-sized hairless dog from Mexico. I forget their name, but they're very interesting looking. They look really crazy mystical. They're not wrinkly like Shar-Peis, but they're totally hairless. And they're kind of like a grayish color. So he transforms into one of these crazy hairless dogs. And he starts like running through the air, like parkouring through the air of this auditorium. And I was like, I got you. I'm going to follow suit. So I transformed into a hairless dog, Mexican dog like him. And I just started parkouring in the exact same squiggly pattern he made through the air. And then he proceeded to be okay. So I want you to wake up and then I want you to fall back asleep and I want you to find me and then I'll let you in. And so after a couple little like wake up and jump back into the same dream line tests, he put me through a couple different tests. Then he reluctantly admitted me into the Dream Academy. And I've been having this reoccurring continuity of dreams over the past several years with different lessons through the academy. A lot of it involves like handing me more and more detailed dreams, and I have to detect the dream because sometimes like the more detailed the dream will be, the more you'll give it the assumption it's probably reality. Like your suspension of disbelief is a higher threshold because it's more detailed. But they'll give me weird circumstances and they'll be like, can she detect it's a dream? And so it took maybe like 2 years of lucid dreaming detection stuff. And then I got assigned about a year ago, a specialized professor to like study directly under. And I cried like a baby when I met her. It was so cool. She's so cool. Her name is Melody, and her name is Melody of the 8 flowers of fate. They are her faith, is what she said. And like this epic music from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly played when she appeared. It was Ecstasy of Gold played It was very, very epic. Yeah, it's been an ongoing journey with this Dream Academy. And then part of it is like they want me to create aspects of the Dream Academy in this world and just sort of like be a bridge between that Dream Academy and one here.
Wow, this is cool. This is inspiring me on so many levels. First of all, I knew that there was some sort of committee that like broadcasted dreams to people. I just like that concept has always made sense to me. Please tell your professors that I want in. And I'm so serious. Like, this sounds so cool. Like,
yeah,
that's incredible.
Absolutely. It's super fun, but it's also just like freaky shit.
Oh, I can handle it.
If you're a game, then that's half the battle.
That's cool. I mean, we're going to have to do this again sometime because there's so much to go into, but you said you're going to bridge the gap, which I love, between the real world and the other dream world. So what are you doing now? Like, I know you mentioned to me kind of that you're working on a course or whatever, but what's like your aspirations for just teaching about dreams?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm polishing up how do I say, like, I have the first 3 courses. They're sort of micro courses, but they're the kind of thing that somebody could watch and follow along and then practice on their own, but they're also open to community building. Like if people want to, like potentially work with me, like one-on-one, all of the modules have additional like expansion packs, I guess you could call it, through one-on-one work. I want to launch that before the end of the year. My life has been extremely wild the past few months. And so I've been sitting on this for a little bit. In my personal life, I'm actually working on the world's largest holodeck right now for a real estate 4 seasons thing, which is really cool. Like there's no like NDA stuff or whatever, and there's tons of press releases, so it's not like I would be giving away secret sauce by saying it. But I definitely think that like fate put me in the right place at the right time to be involved in this project, and I'm excited to see how it'll affect like the trajectory of my work with VR and dreaming related stuff in the future. So a lot of my personal time is pretty dedicated to just like seeing that contract out. That goes till the end of the year. But in my off time personally, I'm hoping I can launch the course within the next few months. I have some of my really respected and dear friends who are in similar fields, sort of like critiquing it right now. I have my buddy, I've asked him to critique it. I'm waiting for him to critique it. My buddy, Jason Louv at Ultra Culture podcast. I definitely recommend people go check him out. He's one of the most talented magicians of our generation. He's also a historian in the occult magic arts. Like he's a badass. I respect and adore him. We did a talk on VR and magic about 2 years ago that people can find on his podcast. He also runs a magical school called magic.me. I also recommend people check that out. And it's something that I plan on openly developing long-term and incorporating a lot of me sharing my personal experience, because I feel like a lot of the information that I get transmitted, even if it's just like storytelling, is relevant to other people's dream journeys. So the first 3 modules cover the basics of lucid dreaming. There's some like herbal assistance stuff. There's oil, like essential oil assistance stuff. There's several essential oils that help people with popping through lucidity, which is kind of cool. And then I've been developing sort of like my own approach to dream interpretation that's not just based on things like Jungian psychology, but it's also based on understanding people's own subjective matrix of meaning. So it's like they kind of look at their own personal history and symbolic syntax, and they can find a way to like find a middle ground between an objective dream interpretation and one that's bespoke and tailored to their own personal mythology, if that makes sense. It's like we can have other people interpret our dreams, but they'll never really understand how personal meanings work for us in our own private life. So finding like a happy medium between that has been my personal approach to dream interpretation over the years. And so like communicating that, and then also getting people familiar with this idea of what I mentioned before, as far as kind of personal dreams, where it's people in your life and like you are you, and it's sort of a one-to-one with reality. Maybe you have that classic dream where like you end up naked by accident at school and you're embarrassed, or like you dream about your teeth aching or breaking apart and you have like financial stress, whatever, like these things that are common archetypes, versus dreams where like you're not yourself, or there might be more mythical symbols or transhuman stuff going on, or like maybe like mythical beings and stuff, versus like deep field cosmic dreams, which tend to move more into the realm of Tibetan dreaming yoga, things where there's almost like a meditative clear light abyss that goes beyond just dream matrices. So kind of familiarizing people with these techniques and vocabularies and categories, but then also just like getting them suited up to then do personal work and potentially just, reach out if they want to work with me on, how to tailor their own dream development techniques and stuff.
Do you have any like just overarching closing advice for people who want more out of their dreams, maybe to explore themselves beyond this life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know this is going to sound like fucking basic, but journaling is absolutely key. Like it's a muscle. It's like if you want to be an athlete, you got to exercise every day and you got to train your muscles. And if you want to be, if you want to dive deep with dream work, I even fall in and out of my journaling habit for real. Like I'll still have those power punch dreams that come out of nowhere. I'm like, oh my God. And I don't need to journal them because they just leave such an indelible mark. But journaling is a big deal because even if it's just little tiny chunks of dreams, once you get into the habit, it becomes easier to have recall. And then you might see patterns with the journaling. And I find that I treat themes like little hashtags that really help. So even if it's just like a bunch of one word little hashtag moments, that's very useful for like making thematic connections over time with your dreams. Something that comes from my understanding of like how to remember a DMT trip is very useful in dream world as well. Don't try to remember your dream from the beginning. Try to remember your dream from the very last thing that happened to you and then move backwards. It's a lot easier to be like, I was just there. And then you'd be like, and then before that, and then before that, as opposed to being like, where the hell did all this start? Because you're just going to get lost. Just linearly backtrack because that's how your brain catalogs it. I think those are the two things that are the easiest. I have a lot of basic stuff that I cover in my cute little YouTube video. Like I list all those oils and all those herbs I mentioned. It's a pretty common knowledge you just Google it, but I just stuck it all in one place in a short little 20-minute video if people want to see, which is fun. I also recommend that like just draw, if you like draw doodles of things from your dreams, it helps your recall. And like, just like dreams are a blessing, like we go through our lives and a lot of times we just, not everybody feels confident because they're like, oh, I just have this mundane life and I just dream about being late to work. And, but if you really just kind of like let go of expectations and just give your consciousness a chance to like boot up in a different way with your dreams and just keep journaling, like it's like a thread out of a sock and it will start to like unravel this crazy tapestry, and it's like I said, it's like a muscle. So I think that, and then, just finding some dream sharing buddies is huge. One of the most important things about my childhood was having a bestie that we did a lot of like dream sharing and we did a lot of like guided visual meditation stuff before bed. We would kind of, we both love Narnia and we always wanted to go to Narnia, C.S. Lewis series. So we would be like, yeah, let's go to Narnia in our dreams tonight. Like, I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to have a sword or a bow and arrow and you should meet me there. And then we'll go on and we would do it and we would come back and dream share the next morning. And we would like remarkably have very similar experiences, even beyond the point that we had verbalized our meeting place and things like that. And to this day, I still share dreams with her. We still share motifs and themes that sync up within days of each other, and it knocks our socks off all the time.
Wow.
So just like be open to the magical stuff that can happen. It's the closest thing we have to like tangible everyday magic.
That's fact.
And just like tune into this podcast more. People listening, this is good shit. And just like support the dreamers and become the dreamers and help other people dream more too. Like just share what you learn as you go. And the more people we get dreaming, the like more we can shape our own reality in this world.
I know a lot of people are going to love this episode because you took me on a whole journey of just, all your life experiences. And it was just so incredible.
I'm so
Thank
honored.
you for that.
I'm so honored. I feel like I've done a couple other podcasts and I've done my show for a couple years now. And a lot of times I'll cover like sci-fi and philosophy and technology and other thinkers. And oftentimes I don't really dive deep into my own personal experiences, just because I love sharing information about other people's work that inspires me. So I feel really, really grateful to have the opportunity to share stuff that is so personal and has shaped me and like shaped my motivation to take the journey that I have. And so I feel like this means a lot to me to be able to like tap into that side of what I would like to share more of. And I'm really just grateful for you to share your platform so people can, check out what I've done and like what you do and what we can do together in the future, because our work is so aligned. I'm just really excited to connect with you. I'm fairly active on Instagram. I'm going to be real. There's a lot of cat pictures, but there's a lot of my art. There's a lot of the different mediums that I do besides VR. I do a lot of performance art and costuming and like weird film stuff and 2D art. I am releasing a book with my mentor, David J. Brown, who wrote a book on dreaming a couple years ago called Dreaming Wide Awake, about lucid dreaming, shamanic healing, and psychedelics. He's an amazing guy. He's been my mentor since I was 19. He is a psychedelic interviewer, and we're doing a book on the illustrated guide to DMT entities, and that's going to be released from Inner Traditions in probably 2025 in their spring catalog. We're going to be finishing it within the next few months. It's got over 30 different entries of different DMT beings, and they're all illustrated with amazing mid-journey AI art, as well as contributions from other artists. So I recommend people check him out, but like look for our book coming out next year. And my YouTube channel is dreamseed_VR. So I call my little channel Dreamseed VR. I talk about VR and psychedelics and tech and philosophy and sci-fi culture, and a lot of ethical stuff with technology as well. So just that sweet spot overlap that I talked about earlier, that's kind of where I bounce around those different spheres. But I think those are probably the best two places to find me. You can find my website is www.saraphin.com. It's SARAPHINN. Yeah, I think those are probably the three best places to check out my work. But people can feel free to message my inbox on Instagram. But in the meantime, the first course is open to the public. It's my lucid dreaming in VR video on my YouTube. And that's the one that has details about herbs and essential oils, as well as the studies that show VR enhances lucid dreaming. There's definitely a lot of people's work that I would love to share with you and your audience, as far as like different thinkers and authors and researchers that are super interesting. And then I definitely have lots of other like wild dream stories that I would love to share that tie into some of the other ones that I shared today. So that would tickle me pink to be able to do this again with you sometime.
Oh, hell yeah. All right. So y'all can expect a part 2 and we'll plan it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I hope everybody just like keeps dreaming bright.
Yes, you too, Sarah. Thank you so much for your amazing energy, and I'll be in touch.
Yeah, likewise.
Bye.